Welcome guys, I am going to teach you how to work licks into your playing. It's a big question I get. I actually got it recently in my free guitar community from Richard. Let me read that question exactly. I'm sure it's something that you guys all deal with. So Richard says, I'm still struggling with integrating licks and lines into my playing. I practice putting them into tunes as an exercise, but fail to be able to use them musically when improvising. Maybe a discussion about integrating jazz vocabulary into one's voice. So let's talk about this. I'm going to give you a 4-step framework here that will dramatically improve your ability to work the lines and ideas, the licks, from the practice room into your actual playing. I'm going to show you some of the things we can do, some of the things we can ignore from traditional advice we're given. So stick around, we'll learn some new licks. I'll show you how to work them in your playing. It'll be a good time. So starting off, we need to pick a lick. That is our first step. And the one I'm using here is this lick I'm still working on from Dan Wilson. So we're going to use an example in my own personal playing that I'm working through and how I'm doing that. So the line sounds like this. I played it at the beginning. And what we want to do from that when we're picking our lick, the first thing is picking a section of it, picking the part that we really think is going to improve our playing, and that we know, okay, if I learn how this part functions, that's going to give me a lot of growth in my playing. For me, that ends up being this little arpeggio thing. That to me just is a great smooth start to a line, and also not something I would normally play. So when I'm picking these licks, I also want to think, what is something that this other player is doing that I want to bring into my playing that I wouldn't normally do? And this way of playing the arpeggio is not something I normally would fall into. Once you've picked the lick, the next step is to analyze the concept. And what I mean by that is we need to understand what is going on within this lick so that we can apply it and work it into our playing. If we just learn it as a lick by itself but don't understand how it functions, it's going to be a lot harder to actually get into our playing. So the first thing we do here is, do you notice any sort of musical elements within this? Like I just kind of said, I'm seeing this as an arpeggio, right? It's like a descending A flat major 7 arpeggio, and then it ascends. The other important thing to know is, what is the harmony that you're using this line over? In this case, Dan was using this over like an F minor, and it's an A flat major 7. And then I'm stopping it right when it goes from E flat to D. The other thing that's super important here with integrating any sort of idea into your playing, especially a specific lick or line, is you need to know what is that note that you're starting on relative to the chord you're on, and what is the end of that phrase. It's like the connection points. If we're trying to put in this line into our playing, we need to know, well, what note leads me into this line and what note leads me out of it. And we'll get more into that later on. But in this case, the way I think about this, if I'm on F minor for this whole type of line, it starts on the 9th on G. So this is a line when I'm playing on a 2 chord, any sort of minor 7, and I start on the 9th. Play this arpeggio idea, descending and ascending, and then I end, maybe this is a 2-5, I end on the 3rd of the 5 chord. I end on the 3rd with that 7 or 3rd. So I know, starts on the 9th, ends on the 3rd, has this major 7 arpeggio idea. That's good enough for analyzing the concept. Obviously, it's going to be different depending on what the line is that you're playing. It might be chromatic ideas. It might be using certain bebop phrases. It might be using a diminished thing or a triad idea. But even within that, you still want to know, what does my line start and end on relative to the harmony. For this third step, I call it move it around. A lot of times we get this advice, you'll hear from a lot of different channels and teachers in general, to play it in all 12 keys. The thing that can be tricky about that with guitar is, in some ways, it's so easy to play it in all 12 keys because we can just shift the idea up 1 fret at a time. And from my experience, I found that doing that doesn't really help you integrate the lick and doesn't really bring it into any sort of playing. There's a few reasons for this. One of the main ones is that we don't really play in all 12 keys evenly, meaning all the repertoire that we have, there's certain chord changes and keys that really predominate for the repertoire that we play. So what I would say is learn it in a few different keys, and I like learning it in 3 other keys from whatever the line traditionally comes from. You want to learn the original line in the key that it's in, and then move it around to 3 other keys. And I like picking keys that I know I'm going to make good use out of this. I'm not going to move this around as much to like C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B minor when it's in F minor, because I know for most jazz standards they're in flat keys, and I want to pick 2 chords where I'm going to actually bring this into my playing. It sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of times when we try and do this in all 12 keys, we spend as much time on keys that we're never going to play it in as we do keys we will play it in. So the keys I like moving this around in, especially this is in F minor. That's a really common key for this type of 2 chord. Moving it around to G minor, right? So we started here, move it up to G minor. And when I'm doing that, I'm also visualizing the chord, starting on G minor 9 right here. And maybe here I'm visualizing the C7 that's there. So it's like this, G minor, to that C7. And then that lick is super clear to me. When we're moving it around like that, we're going to start seeing different placements for it across the fretboard. We'll start to see this idea all across the fretboard. And before I get into the other 2 keys, the other step here is making sure that we've learned the original lick in a few different positions. So like I said, I like learning it in 3 other keys and at least 1 other position. Sometimes we can get 2, sometimes we can get 3. Depends on the idea, how many strings it spans, and how big of an idea it is. So in this case, if we're taking the original idea, starting on that G on the B string, I might move that around and start it on the G here, on the G string, G on the G string. See how that fits in, right? And then I might move it around up here to the G on the high E string. That one has a slightly different feel because this little A flat chord and the change in the shape. So after I've had it in those positions, that's when I'll move it around into these other keys. We just did D minor, sorry, we just did G minor. I might also do C minor, and maybe I'll pick this position for that. So the D that's here, that's kind of a nice one. And then maybe we do D minor, and I'll do that using this shape. So just to recap this, we want 3 other keys and at least 2 other positions when we move this idea around. We're not done yet though. A lot of advice stops at this point and really just says, well, start playing it with other people and it'll just kind of work its way in your playing. But I think there's a few other things we can do that make it a lot more likely to come out in our playing. And it ties back to this idea of knowing what the starting note and the ending note of the line is. And we could think about this almost like Lego bricks. We have a new brick that we're trying to fit into our existing lineup of bricks, and we need to see how we can connect it in. So in order to do that, there's a few different ways we can connect this piece in. We need to know, okay, if I start with this idea, what part of my vocabulary leads off from wherever this idea ends? So new vocab plus my tie in immediately to my old vocabulary. I'll show you an example of that. Then we need to know, okay, if I'm playing my regular vocabulary, how do I lead into this new vocabulary? So it's old vocab plus new vocab. And then finally, we want to know, okay, where does this idea fit if I'm coming into it and out of it in a bigger idea? And if you practice those 3 ways of really fitting in this vocabulary, instead of just like putting it in isolation where it's not tied to other vocab, where it's just like lick, pause, new lick, space, and then other stuff, it's never really going to feel natural to bring this vocabulary in. So let's look at a few of those examples. For the first one, I'm going to start with this new idea and then go into other vocabulary. In this case, I'm going to use this triad idea. We've been working on triad pairs in my paid community. You guys can check out the link in the description if you're interested. We are opening up membership. If you're interested in joining, now is the time to do that. So let's look at this one. This is over 2/5 in B flat. So we have the C minor one that we looked at. And I'm going to connect it right into this other lick. So I know that idea now leads me into this other triad pair idea. Next up, I said we're going to end with this new idea. So how do I lead into this idea? In this case, we'll do this in using the D minor shape for this. So 2-5 in C. We have this. And this last example is putting that new idea in the middle of some vocabulary. Ends up being a double time sort of idea. And this is a 2-5 in F. So it starts like this. One thing that's cool about this is I start to see, wow, I can use this new idea to connect me down a position. So I went from this G minor shape, and now I'm more in this position 1 lower. So we have this. Now I'm shifting right here to a lower position. So that's giving me some new ideas of how I might use this. Is when I want to shift down lower in my position. So hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. If you guys want to learn more from me directly, I do have a paid membership, a paid community with live courses, live coaching and curriculum. It's a lot that's there. A recent student recently described it as basically the Rosetta Stone for jazz guitar, which I like that analogy because I am trying to break down the code for learning jazz guitar and really teach us in a systematic way. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to check out the link in the description below where there's a bunch more info, or you can always send me a email or chat in the free guitar community, and I'll answer any of your questions there. So thanks guys for watching. The free PDF for this is also in the free community. So if you want to really dig into this idea, and if you're more of a visual learner, you can check that out there. See you guys there. Bye.